Hello everyone, and welcome to the Hearth. It's a pleasure to see you again, and I hope you're doing well. Pull up a seat by the fire, enjoy some refreshments, and I hope you enjoy the story. "Alright, Mom, I'm heading out," Lee yelled, hopping out the door as he pulled on his second sneaker. "Tutoring?" she asked, although she was already fairly sure of the answer. "Yup," came the expected response, before she saw her son tearing across the lawn, pulling his bike from the garage. She grinned. Her son had never disliked school, but even so, it was almost comical how much he enjoyed his tutoring sessions. According to Lee, a friend was helping him with his world history class. And from what was said at the last parent-teacher conference, it was certainly helping. She just wished Lee would bring his friend over for dinner sometime. Nothing said thank you like dinner. Outside, Lee pedaled along the sidewalk, enjoying the cold air. If these days kept up, there would be snow soon. He was looking forward to that. Before long, he reached the graveyard. He hopped off his bike, wheeling it up the dirt road through the gate. He wandered past the graves, stopping to look at headstones that caught his eye. Soon he reached the mausoleum, a gray, somber structure, rising quietly from the center of the graveyard. Lee leaned his bike against the side of the building and stepped inside. This mausoleum was by no means large. It only contained a few crypts, none of which were of any particular interest to Lee. His purpose here was not with the mausoleum itself. He knelt down and knocked 3 times on the marble floor. For a moment there was silence, and then, slowly, the floor slid open to reveal a stone staircase leading into the earth. Lee shouldered his backpack and descended into the darkness. The darkness didn't last long, however. As he made his way along the corridor, lanterns, already lit, lined the walls. He made his way to the end, pushing open the thick oak door to reveal a cozy, well-lit room, complete with a crackling fireplace and a full dining set. The warm smell of caramel hung in the air, making the place even cozier. Seated at the table, sipping a steaming cup of tea, was a middle-aged woman, streaks of gray peeking through her dark hair. "Hi, Mrs. Maron." "I'm not late this time," Lee said, sitting down across from her and setting his backpack on the ground next to him. Mrs. Maron grinned. "Hopefully you'll make it a habit. Appearances aside, I am quite a busy woman." She rose, pushing open yet another door and vanishing into another room. She returned with a kettle and another cup, and proceeded to pour him tea and refill her own cup. Once all tea supplies had been properly replenished, she sat down. "So, what are we dealing with this time?" "France," Lee replied, pulling his book from his backpack and flipping through the pages. "France?" Mrs. Maron's eyes lit up. "Oh, France was a lovely experience. Quite a roller coaster, that one." "Better than the Roman Empire? Or Egypt? Egypt seemed like your favorite." "I wouldn't say it was better than Egypt, but France was quite an exciting history in its own right." Mrs. Maron took a deep breath, collecting her thoughts. "Well then, shall we begin?" Mrs. Maron's clock read well past 7 when Lee walked up the steps back into the mausoleum, Mrs. Maron walking him out. "So, let me get this straight. You knew Joan of Arc?" "Yes, she was a student of mine. She always had a flair for the theatrical that didn't sit well with me." "You literally just told me you took part in the French Revolution." Mrs. Maron shrugged. "I suppose you could say I got a bit caught up in the flow. Besides, the aristocracy really was getting out of hand. You have no idea how absolutely rude they were becoming with their estate system and whatnot." "What else did you do?" Let's just focus on France for now. We'll get to the rest once you finish this part of your class. Lee was disappointed, but Mrs. Maron wasn't the type to budge. He tried his luck with a different question. If you've been around for so long, why do you live under a mausoleum? There's no way you're broke, right? Couldn't you have your own house? Mrs. Maron smiled. That kind of someday you'll understand smile that adults got sometimes. I'll tell you why one day, but for now, let's just say that there comes a time when you just want to be left alone. Then why are you teaching me? She paused, composing her answer. No matter what the time period, there are certain things that always stay the same. I am, above all, a teacher. I've always found ways to teach, as long as I could find good students, or they could find me. Students like you. Although I do wish you were a bit more punctual. The two chuckled. Lee headed to the exit, waving goodbye. Have a good night, Mrs. Maron. I'll see you tomorrow. Mrs. Maron sat in her chair, a trail of steam rising from her cup of tea next to her. She was knitting, although she didn't really have any ideas in mind. She simply enjoyed the idea of making something. She briefly thought about making something for Lee, perhaps a pair of gloves or a hat. It was getting colder after all. But it had been quite a while since he had come to visit. No matter the lifespan, growing up doesn't afford one much free time. Just as the thought left her head, she heard it. The grinding of stone sliding away. Soon enough, that door was pushing open, and Lee, armed with a coat, hat, and a close-trimmed beard, stepped into the room. Hey, Mrs. Maron. I guess I'm a little late. Oh, well, you only graduated, what, 5 years ago? That's not so bad. Lee chuckled. Sorry, college got a bit overwhelming. I did make it to my bachelor's, though. And you did it entirely without my help, Mrs. Maron replied. I'm quite proud of you. Thanks. Lee smiled, pulling the book bag from his shoulder and setting it on the table. He sat down across from her. I've also got something to show you. He opened the bag, rummaging around and pulling out a book. It just hit store shelves a week ago, but I made sure to snag the first print for you. He slid the book across the table. It was a simple design, a small, hardcover book, a burnt amber color with no symbols or decorations of any kind. Printed on the front in gold lettering was the title, History According to Mrs. Maron. She stared at the book in surprise. Did you write this? Lee grinned. Took me quite a while, too. She couldn't help but smile. You know no one is going to take this seriously, right? As far as the world will know, this is a fantasy book. Maybe so, but you and I know differently. And something about that is fun enough to make it worth it, don't you think? Mrs. Maron didn't speak, letting her growing smile do the talking for her. Besides, my class is going to love it. Class? Mrs. Maron raised an eyebrow. Your teacher? Lee nodded. World history. I teach at the same school I used to go to. I started back in August. I'm still working on getting my professional license, but I've got my initial license, so it's just a bit more college and I'll be all set. Well then, let's hope you don't keep them waiting as long as you did me. Lee chuckled. Don't worry. If I need some help, I know exactly who to come to. Mrs. Maron turned the book over in her hands, examining it again. She stood, smiling warmly. So, do you think you have enough time for tea?